Hi everybody, I actually decided to, in this video, tell another story out of this book, Kentucky Ghosts by William Lynwood Montell. If you're paying attention, in the last video I told a story out of here about the ghost with the fireplace and everything, and I went over what this book was about and stuff. So, I'm going to read another story out of here and, share it with you guys. And I'm going to read it kind of verbatim too. And one other thing, if you end up not seeing my face through part of this, it's because I'm reading the story to you. And just as a reminder, this book here, this is geared towards, adults learning to read. I mentioned that in the previous video, but I thought I'd rehash that here just briefly, so that way you guys are not going, why is she reading such an easy book aloud to us? Well, I just wanted to share this with you. So that way, I just thought you would enjoy hearing some of the stories, or at least a couple of the stories out of this book. Alright? So here's the next story. It's called Dog Ghost Seeks Revenge. There's a lot of old folk beliefs about dogs and the way they act. I recall hearing people talk about how these things when I was a little fellow. For sure, my relatives here in Trigg County, now the land between the lakes, which, as a side note, Tony and I have been there, and, there's videos here on this channel that talk about what we think about the place. I believe that certain actions of dogs were signs of things that were about to happen. Some of these signs were good, others not so good. I've heard people in the community say that if you hear dogs howling late at night in an eerie, mournful way, a death in the family is sure to follow. Some said, too, if dogs howl when someone is seriously sick, that person will die soon. Now, don't laugh when I tell you this one, but they always claim that when a dog rolls over on its back and lies still, you'll hear of a death in the community. Years ago, we had a dog named Bravo. He proved to me that these beliefs weren't all nonsense. Bravo wasn't a house dog. Truth of the matter is, you couldn't get him in the house. He would come onto the porch, but all the tugging in the world wouldn't get him in the house. Well, late one afternoon, my brother and I were out walking. Of course, Bravo was right there with us. We came by old man Miller's house. The poor fellow had been sick for some time. The door to his front room was open, and Bravo went into that room and walked on over to old man Miller's bed. The old fellow reached out and patted Bravo on the head. After a few minutes, the dog turned away and ran out of the room. He went over to the yard, lay down in the grass, rolled over, and stuck his front feet and legs straight up in the air. My brother looked at me kind of funny. I knew right then what he was thinking. Sure enough, old man Miller died that night. The strangest dog story I ever heard was about a ghost dog. The ghost centers around a man whose name was Ned Crawford. He killed a man and his dog over here in Golden Pond community. Crawford always played a lot of cards and sometimes drank too much whiskey. One night Crawford got into a fight during a card game with Paul Jackson, a neighbor who always took his black dog along with him. They were alone when it happened at Jackson's lonely cabin. No sooner had the fuss started before Ned pulled his knife and stabbed Jackson in the gut. As Jackson pitched backward, the black dog snarled and jumped. It grabbed a hold of Ned's free arm. He swung at the dog with his knife and cut the animal's throat. Blood from both victims covered the floor. Crawford was panting and sweating. He had done murder and he was scared to death. All he could think to do was to take the two bodies to a muddy pond not far away. In the cover of darkness, he dragged the bodies to the water and threw them in. From that time on, Ned could never go any place without seeing the ghost of Jackson and his dog, so he couldn't even step in his own yard without seeing them. This ghost dog would come over to Crawford and just growl and grit its teeth at him. Crawford was so scared to death that he finally left the county and moved all the way to Springfield, Missouri. He figured he could start life all over there without anyone being suspicious. Crawford also thought by moving away from the scene of the murder, he could get rid of the ghost of Jackson and the dog. But the second night he was there in Missouri, he stepped out in the yard of the house where he was staying. And don't you know that dog was walking right along behind him just a few feet away. This same thing took place almost every night for about 3 months. It just about worried Crawford to death. Sometimes Jackson's ghost was there also. You see, Ned was feeling guilty over killing the man and his dog. He couldn't live with himself, and he couldn't stay there in Missouri any longer. He didn't know what else to do, so he came back to his old home here in Kentucky. Let me tell you right now, Ned Crawford was never himself again. He moved in with his mother, but she died soon after he got home. From what I heard, she must have worried herself to death over Ned's behavior because he became very withdrawn. He hardly talked at all. She may not have known what he had done, but she must have known it was something bad. After his mother's death, the only thing Crawford would do was go down to the general store. He would just sit there on a nail keg. He would never say a word to any of the rest of us. We all wondered why he wouldn't talk. He always had gone to the store as a boy to buy cold sodas and eat peanuts and cheese and crackers with the rest of the boys. Back then he talked as much as the rest of us. Anyway, an older fellow there at the store asked Crawford to go home with him. This man's name was Willie Smith. He said he needed help with harvesting the wheat crop. Smith even invited Crawford to eat his meals with them and spend the night there. Crawford still wouldn't say a word, just followed Smith home. When they got home, Willie suggested that the two of them go for a ride on horseback. It was a fine late summer evening, and there was plenty of time for supper. Smith saddled up the two horses, and they went riding off down the road not far from the pond where Crawford had tossed the bodies of Jackson and his dog. Well, lo and behold, a big black dog appeared suddenly and just stood there in the middle of the road in front of Smith and Crawford. The ghost dog's eyes were shining something awful, and its teeth gleamed as it snarled at Crawford. Then the dog turned away and headed towards the pond. It walked right into the water and disappeared. Soon the dog came out of the pond with a bone in its mouth. The dog, or should I say the ghost of a dog, came up between the two men and dropped the bone right between their feet. Thud it went as it hit the ground. The reins shook in Crawford's hands, but he didn't say a word. Smith didn't know what to make of what he saw. He knew something strange was going on because the bone didn't look like a hog or a cow bone. It looked like a human bone. Smith knew right then the dog was trying to tell him something. Crawford sank down in the saddle and placed his head on his hands. He began to cry and shake all over. Then he admitted killing Paul Jackson and his big black dog. He claimed that he couldn't shake the memory of the awful thing he had done. He went on to tell how he had seen the ghost of both Jackson and his dog every time he stepped out of the house. Smith got down off his horse and pulled Crawford out of the saddle. He took Crawford by the arm and led him over to the edge of the pond. The ghost of the big black dog stood and watched as Smith pulled more bones from the pond. Crawford was turned over to the sheriff and put in jail to wait a trial for murder. The jury convicted him of the crime, and the judge gave him a lifetime in prison for what he had done. But neither the judge nor any of the others present in the courtroom that day witnessed what Crawford said at that very moment. None, nor could they understand his great sigh of relief. The big black dog's ghost had been standing in the doorway of the courtroom, only visible to Crawford. When the dog ghost heard the judge proclaim Crawford's life sentence, it turned around and slowly faded into a faint cloud of mist. Crawford smiled. Although he faced a prison cell for the rest of his life, he knew that he would never again see the dog or its master. The ghost of a dog had seen justice done. Well, anyway, I just wanted to share this with you guys. If I decide to tell more stories, it probably won't be out of this book, Kentucky Ghosts. Granted, the stories are short, like that one and the other one I read in the last video, but I really am not going to be reading any more out of it because you can, pretty well, like I said in the last video and this one, you can carve that book up pretty quick, if you want to. I mean, I do recommend it if you're learning to read, and you're older. You can get this book. It's actually $6, or it was when I bought it, because I got the price tag on here where it says $5.95. Well, anyway, I'm going to pause here, and I thank you all for watching. I hope you have a good evening.